She was the daughter of the mayor, wife of the police chief, mother of two, and a substitute teacher in her small town school district. Now she's a convicted sex offender who's been sentenced to 6 years behind bars. We first brought you this story right here on Law and Crime when 28-year-old Emma Delaney Hancock was arrested on child sex crimes. Her case is out of Wellston, Oklahoma, a small town about 40 minutes outside of Oklahoma City. According to court documents, the story begins on October 6, 2022, when Hancock was a substitute teacher at a local school. She was working with a 15-year-old student and exchanged phone numbers with him, apparently to discuss a homework assignment. It's unclear if they ever talked about that schoolwork, though. In searching Hancock's phone, investigators later learned that she friend requested the boy that very night on Snapchat. So their relationship, if you want to call it that, began on Snapchat and quickly turned even more questionable. Investigators say the boy sent Hancock a shirtless pic, and she sent explicit photos and videos in return. And it's not like she was unaware that what she was doing was illegal. In one Snapchat conversation, she wrote, quote, "Are we sending half-naked pictures now?" The boy responded, "I don't know. Are we?" This next part is crucial as it goes to consciousness of guilt. Hancock replied, quote, "Are you trying to get me to lose my job?" The inappropriate relationship spanned more than just social media, though. As Hancock continued to sub for the school, she met up with the boy several times right on campus. During the teens' lunch hour, they met up in a pantry and a closet where they made out. Hancock also groped the boy during at least one of these interactions. On top of that, she even allowed the boy to use her vape pen. Eventually, the student told one of his friends about his relationship with Hancock, and that friend confronted her. Hancock at first denied it, but then apparently told the friend it would, quote, "not amount to anything because they were not going to get caught." But that's not exactly what happened. In November 2022, an investigation began by the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office, and later they were assisted by the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. Through a search warrant, authorities found Snapchat videos from those classroom incidents and the troubling conversations between Hancock and the boy. On April 13, 2013, Hancock turned herself over to police, but later pleaded not guilty to the charges. Hancock went to trial this fall, and her husband, Police Chief Alfred Hancock, actually took the stand defending her. It didn't help, though. She was charged with 3 counts of soliciting sex with a minor through the use of technology and 2 counts of lewd or indecent acts to a child under 16. Hancock was ultimately convicted on one of the sex solicitation charges, but acquitted on the others and the lewd or indecent acts charge. Just this month, Hancock was sentenced to 6 years and 3 months in prison. As for the young boy, his name hasn't been revealed publicly, but his family has spoken with local Oklahoma TV stations. They told reporters their family is happy with the sentencing, but say the victim has already lost too much. The family member said, quote, "His entire high school years were online, so we missed all that. The sports events, the prom, walking across the stage." From here, the family has moved forward with a civil suit against Hancock as well. All right, we're turning now to criminal defense attorney Serena Townsend. And Serena, these cases are becoming all too common, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's so disturbing to see these women in a position of power, a woman educator who's taking advantage of her students, who should really just know better, especially a woman who's married to and comes from a law enforcement family. It's really striking to see this happening, and it's just so upsetting. And we just have to be so careful with our children. You would hope not having to worry about our children going to school and being, molested by their teachers, but here we are.
You touched on something so important in the vein of this case specifically. We have a teacher and educator, someone you should trust. She's the wife of the police chief and the daughter of the mayor. I mean, for their small town, last year the population was 692 people. It seems like she was in a pretty high status role. So it automatically gets me thinking, is this a major abuse of power on her end?
Absolutely. Look, imagine how intimidating it is for a child to have to deal with this kind of situation with just anyone or even a teacher is already somebody in a powerful position over them. And now to add to it, somebody so powerful, so connected. Could you imagine how difficult it must be for a child to come out and say these things against somebody with that kind of power and maybe money behind her, knowing that he's the David and she's the Goliath?
You're right. It really is a lot of bravery for someone who was only 15 at the time, a child. I mean, really tough to think about. Another aspect of the case that jumps out to me, too, is that our defendant here was a substitute teacher. So, a lot of the time, we're doing stories about someone who is in the same classroom as the student, maybe is a coach or works with them after school. So, they get to know the child kind of a lot. And in this case, a substitute teacher, they're usually in and out, maybe even switching classrooms. So how was it that she was able to connect with this child in that way with such limited amount of time at the school?
You wonder, and I mean, you just kind of wonder where her mindset is because it's never forgivable, obviously. But if somebody, she doesn't even know this kid, like she doesn't even spend a lot of time with this person. There's no way that you could even say, her judgment was just so clouded because they just got to know each other so well. And it just strikes me as well, if you're so capable of getting into this level of inappropriateness with a child that you barely know, just how dangerous are you around people who you've been able to really groom? So that's the takeaway for me on the substitute aspect.
It is wild to think about. And also, something that stood out immediately, and unfortunately, something we see in a lot of these cases, is that they exchanged phone numbers. At first, it was for a homework assignment, it sounded like, but then they connected on Snapchat. And some of the conversations were wild to me. One, I wanted to quote exactly what she said. She said, "Are you trying to get me to lose my job?" When they're talking about sending shirtless photos back and forth. To me, right away, that's consciousness of guilt.
You took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly what it is. I mean, anybody should really know that. But when you're a prosecutor, for example, and you're looking at evidence like that, and the person is basically making a confession when they write that, they are saying, I know that what we are doing is wrong. I know that there should be repercussions for this type of behavior. And then continuing to do it anyway, it just makes things so much worse for the person being charged, for this woman, because you know what you were doing was wrong and you actually put it in writing.
Beyond just putting it in writing, though, she also took photos. And this is something I feel like I've even asked you this before. I truly can't wrap my brain around it. The fact that we have these explicit photos that investigators can go back and track. She sent this to a 15-year-old kid. I mean, black and white right there. We have the photos. Why would she take these photos? They're so incriminating.
It's terrible. I don't know why people don't understand and appreciate that you could get access to these kinds of photos. I think the thought process is, well, Snapchat deletes things and they feel safe that way. And they just feel like nobody's going to be able to crack that and get into it. So maybe that's why, but it's just such a terrible idea. I mean, if you have the right people looking at your phone and you're able to access that SIM card or get the right subpoenas for the right companies, and the company cooperates, then yes, you are still going to have those photos surface, even if you think they're deleted.
Hey, all you business owners or anyone hoping to start a side hustle, I have to take a quick second and tell you about something that can seriously level up your business game. It's odoo.com and their incredible accounting app. You know how keeping track of finances can get messy and confusing? Well, Odoo makes it super simple. With their accounting app, you can manage invoices, expenses, and even get financial reports all in one place. Take a look at this clean interface. It's designed just to save you time and reduce your headaches. You can automate those repetitive tasks, which means you'll have more time to focus on what you really love. That's growing your business. So if you want to take control of your finances and make accounting a whole lot easier, check out Odoo's accounting app at our link, odoo.com/lcnews27, and try Odoo for free today. It's kind of wild to think that this person may have assumed investigators couldn't get into her phone. So I guess just something to consider. The next part of all of this is that she seemed pretty brazen to me in the fact that she made out with this student and groped him during school hours on the school campus. I had seen in a pantry or in a closet. I mean, that is very wild. Somebody could have just opened the door and walked in while she's on duty.
That just goes to show you, right, that the mindset is crazy. And I think also she might have just gotten off on the thrill of it. Even like just taking it all into consideration, the text messages, ooh, I'm going to lose my job. So she knows that, but yet she still conducts the activity at her workplace. So, obviously she maybe was getting off on the thrill of having that illicit activity in her workplace itself. And it's really disturbing. And it just goes to show just what was going through her mind and why she's not capable of being a teacher ever again. And hopefully with this conviction, we'll make sure of that.
What's different about this case versus some of the others we've talked about is that it seems there was no actual sexual contact. I mean, they made out with each other. Apparently, she groped him, but they didn't actually have sex. So that stood out to me. But is it something that prosecutors could have pointed out? It was only a matter of time. She was doing all of these things, kissing him, sending him these photos, texting with him, all of that, that it could have eventually led to sex?
Sure. I mean, I think that that plays a role in the idea of the sentencing aspect. So, because the prosecutor is kind of married to or linked to the actual charge that has to be linked to the actual actions, they can't necessarily, add a charge for what was expected to happen next. But at the same time, after she's been convicted of certain things, you can argue to a judge, look, the sentencing guidelines say she's facing anywhere from A to Z. And we think that this is an aggravating factor. The fact that, like, even though she didn't, engage in actual intercourse, it looked like that was where this was headed. It doesn't look like she had remorse. It looks like she was kind of taking him down this path that would have been worse had somebody not stepped in when they did. So that kind of idea goes towards maybe the sentencing guidelines. Yeah.
If we're talking about what actually happened in court, she pleaded not guilty. She maintained she didn't do this even now after sentencing, still pointing the finger at the student. She's been convicted on some of the crimes. But during the trial, her husband, the police chief who we spoke of, actually testified and said, I don't believe she did anything wrong. Nothing happened. I mean, obviously that testimony wasn't enough to convince the jury that she should be fully acquitted, right?
Right. So, first of all, I just think he has so much interest in saying that. We call somebody like him at trial an interested witness, meaning, is there something that he gains out of potentially lying on the stand? And a judge is going to instruct a jury that just because somebody's an interested witness doesn't mean you should disbelieve their testimony, but you're allowed to take into consideration what happens to that person if the defendant is convicted. So obviously, it would bring great shame to him if his wife is convicted. It might affect his own work status. It'll obviously affect the lives of his children and his family. So I think a jury, when they heard him saying those things, they may have taken into consideration the fact that, like, he has a lot of reasons to lie on her behalf.
Talking about the jury's deliberations, obviously our defendant here was convicted on some of the charges, but it wasn't a full sweep. Some of them she was acquitted on. Why do you think the jury made the choices that they did? That some were, yes, she did it, and some, no, she didn't.
I think that the jury relied very heavily on physical evidence in this case. It's very hard for victims and survivors of sexual abuse to testify, and this person did. The student actually got up there and testified, which is very impressive and very difficult. But sometimes a jury wants more. They would like something to corroborate that testimony. And I think that some of the evidence that they were hoping for or expecting for did not come out, including actually some of the pictures. Somehow, I guess they were not able to get all of them. And so I think a jury said to themselves, well, we would have an easier time convicting. Remember, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. So it's a very high burden for the prosecution to meet. And without all of the physical evidence, I think a jury was a little nervous to convict her of everything. But I think they gave a compromised verdict. I think that the message was, we think that you did something wrong here. These are the things that we're comfortable that we know for a fact you did wrong, but we'll let you off on the stuff that didn't really have as much evidence.
So now we've been through this sentencing, and she was sentenced to a bit more than 6 years, but it seems as though she'll only have to serve 4 if she kind of follows the rules, the guidelines, doesn't do anything behind bars that could get her time tacked onto her sentence. But why is that? If she's sentenced to more than 6 years, but will likely only serve 4?
It's very standard practice, actually. And I guess, it's a strange thing, really, because you would think if somebody's sentenced to a certain amount of years, that's the amount of years that they do. But it's not just her, it's really everybody. I know here in New York, you serve like 8/10 of the time that you're sentenced. Of course, there's an opportunity to make you serve the exact amount of years if you're not cooperative in jail or in prison. If you do things that are wrong, if you get tickets or infractions, they could increase your time. But so long as you kind of act on good behavior in a jail or prison, you typically don't spend the exact number of years that you're sentenced to.
We have to remember in talking about this case too, is we have a child who's a victim or a survivor rather, 15 at the time of all of this. And his family has since spoken to some local news outlets. We don't have his name as of now, but they've said he actually had to be pulled out of school. He now does homeschooling online. This has really affected him and his childhood. So what's next for this survivor, this person who has to move forward with their life?
I think a lot of people feel that it's, especially when it's a female teacher and a male student, we sometimes hear like, oh, what's the big deal? He's 15, he's not 10, he probably, was happy about this. And it's really, that has been proven study after study to not be true. Whether you're a male or a female student, you're taken advantage of by a teacher sexually. You do have lifelong trauma that comes about from there. I'm not necessarily surprised that he was pulled out because you know what? Maybe she gets punished and she, went to trial and it is what it is for her. But he still has to roam the halls of the school and he could be tormented or bullied or, there's a lot of stuff that goes on that's not just centered around the teacher. Other students, maybe other teachers. I mean, there's such a stigma now that he carries, and it wasn't even his fault. So, he does suffer still, I am sure, and he'll have to try to rebuild his life from here.
I wonder if all of that leads into the next part. Obviously, our defendant has faced criminal charges, but there's also a civil suit from the survivor's family against her. Do you think that they have a strong case here?
I do. So the thing is, a civil case, the burden of proof is much lower than the burden of proof for a criminal case. And that is why you'll see a lot of times the civil case will track the criminal case. It'll kind of just wait in abeyance because if a prosecution could get a conviction on a standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, then the civil attorney can use that result for their argument, for their, proof levels on the civil case. And it's a much easier case to win now that they have this determination. They get to say, look, they were able to clear that high burden. Certainly it means that she was guilty and that she owes him, damages.
Serena Townsend, as always, a pleasure to talk to you, even if it's something so emotional and difficult to chat about. Thank you for coming on with us.
Thank you so much.
After Hancock completes her sentence, she'll be required to register as a sex offender. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.